Here's a strange fact. Gen Z may be one of the most analyzed and talked about generations in modern history, and still one of the most misunderstood. To older generations, they can look like a walking contradiction, glued to their phones, yet anxious about them, loud about their feelings, yet quietly struggling, idealistic, yet surprisingly practical. But those contradictions aren't random. Once you understand the world Gen Z grew up in, their psychology starts to make a lot more sense, because they didn't choose the environment that shaped them. They adapted to it. In the next few minutes, we'll look at 8 psychological patterns that help explain how Gen Z thinks, feels, connects, and makes decisions. Of course, no generation is one personality. These are patterns, not rules. But by number 8, many of the things that look confusing from the outside start to fit together. Number 1, they were born underwater. Every generation before Gen Z remembers some version of a before. Before smartphones were everywhere. Before social media followed you into every room. Before being reachable every second of the day. Gen Z largely doesn't. For them, the online world isn't simply a place you visit. It's part of the environment they grew up inside. And that's why the fish metaphor matters. A fish doesn't wake up thinking about water. Water is simply reality. So when someone asks, why are they always on their phones? The question can miss the deeper point. The phone isn't only a device, it's a doorway to friendships, entertainment, identity, school, work, news, and increasingly, life itself. Number 2, the connection paradox. On paper, Gen Z has access to more people than almost any generation before them. Group chats never sleep. Friends can live on the other side of the world. 100 lives can appear on one screen in under a minute. And yet, many young people also report feeling lonely. Both things can be true. Imagine a house made entirely of windows. You can see everyone. Everyone can see you. But windows aren't doors. You can watch 100 lives scroll past and still feel like no one truly sees yours. The connection is wide. What can be missing is depth. And human beings don't only need to be visible, they need to feel known. Number 3, they speak fluent feelings. Gen Z grew up with a mental health vocabulary that became far more public than it was for many previous generations. Anxiety, boundaries, burnout, triggers, therapy. Words that once stayed private now show up in everyday conversations, videos, memes, classrooms, and dinner table arguments. Older generations can sometimes interpret that openness as fragility, but there is another way to see it. Imagine 2 people looking at the same painting. One can only say, it's blue. The other can name navy, cobalt, teal, indigo, and sky. More words don't automatically mean more pain. Sometimes they simply mean more precision. And when people can name what is happening inside them, they have a better chance of talking about it. Number 4, the permanent audition. For most of human history, people could become themselves mostly in private, among family, friends, classmates, and a small local world. Gen Z grew up building identity in public, with a comment section attached. Imagine figuring out who you are while standing under a spotlight, with every awkward phase potentially saved, shared, or screenshotted. That changes the experience of growing up. It can create extraordinary self-awareness and extraordinary self-consciousness, an outfit, an opinion, a photo, a joke. Each one can become a tiny audition for belonging. And when part of your sense of self depends on how an audience reacts, a quiet pressure can sit underneath everything. Keep performing, keep curating, keep the audience happy. And this is where the story changes. The first 4 patterns are mostly about the environment Gen Z inherited. The next 4 are about what they learned to do because of it. And those responses are not always what the stereotypes predict. Number 5, the authenticity radar. Gen Z grew up surrounded by advertising that learned how to disguise itself as everyday life. Sponsored posts, influencer deals, perfectly polished feeds, brands trying to sound like friends. So many younger viewers became extremely sensitive to anything that feels staged, forced, or fake. It's like growing up next to a factory. Eventually, you notice the smell before visitors do. That's why something raw, imperfect, and human can sometimes earn more trust than something glossy and flawless. Perfect doesn't automatically feel impressive. Sometimes it feels suspicious. What matters is whether the person, brand, or message feels real enough to believe. Number 6. Pragmatic, not pessimistic. Gen Z came of age while instability was unusually visible. A global financial crisis shaped many families. Then came a pandemic, rising living costs, housing pressure, climate anxiety, and a non-stop stream of bad news arriving directly through the same device in their pocket. So caution can make sense. Picture someone planting a careful garden while a storm moves across the horizon. That isn't necessarily pessimism. It can be preparation. Many young adults want flexibility, financial security, and more than one path forward, because they have repeatedly watched plans change overnight. What can look like distrust of the future may actually be a generation trying very hard not to be surprised by it. Number 7. Values are not just decoration. For many Gen Z consumers and workers, what a company says, how it behaves, and what it appears to stand for can influence whether they want to buy from it, work for it, or publicly support it. That doesn't mean every young person shares the same values. They clearly don't. The pattern is that alignment itself matters. Think of values less like a bumper sticker and more like a backbone. A backbone is structural. It determines how you stand. And when a brand, employer, or public figure appears to violate something important, younger audiences can withdraw trust very quickly. Not because they expect perfection, because inconsistency is easy to expose in a world where receipts live forever. Number 8. They're often reaching some traditional milestones later. Driving, dating, drinking, leaving home, full-time work, long-term commitment. The exact pattern varies by country, culture, and family, but the broader shift is real enough to notice. Some people interpret that as a failure to launch. But there is another way to see it. Think of fruit that ripens slowly because the season itself has changed. Young people now grow up with more information, more choices, higher costs in many places, and a much longer period of education and dependence than earlier generations experienced. So slower isn't automatically the same as stuck. Sometimes it is caution, sometimes economics, sometimes a different timetable entirely. The mistake is assuming that one generation's clock must be everyone else's. So here's what ties all 8 together. Gen Z isn't a riddle to be solved, they're a reflection. The anxiety, the openness, the caution, the hunger for something real, the strange mix of hyperconnection and loneliness. None of it appeared out of nowhere. It makes more sense when you look at the world that raised them. They didn't break the rules, they were handed a different game. And maybe the most revealing thing about Gen Z isn't how different they are from everyone before them. It's how clearly they reflect the world that made them.